Here's some undeniable trauma, just a horrific story here from the New York Times. Several family members of Al Jazeera's Gaza bureau chief are killed. Wahel al-Dadu, described by his colleagues as the voice of Palestinians in Gaza, lost his wife, son, daughter, and infant grandson, Al Jazeera said. At least 4 family members of a prominent Al Jazeera journalist in Gaza were killed, the news organization said on Wednesday. The network said the wife, son, daughter, and infant grandson of Wahel al-Dadu, the Gaza bureau chief of Al Jazeera's Arabic language service, were killed at the Nuseirat refugee camp in central Gaza, where they had been sheltering. Okay, so if this is a refugee camp, why were they hit? Like, if there's any... Like, well, we are supposed to believe that they're taking care to not harm civilians, and then what are you bombing a refugee camp for? Why were they hit at a refugee camp? Why is that not a safe shelter? It's just so absurd.
And the question is also, was his family being specifically targeted in retaliation for his reporting?
Well, that's a question, too. But I have a feeling, I mean, this is hunch. This is not based on anything. What we're seeing is a carpet bombing. That's what we're seeing. And
well, Al Jazeera did an investigation about this, and while they didn't make the claim, one of the Israelis actually said it, that they had retaliated against his family. Like, they had that in their news report about it. They said we can't prove that that's the case, but this is deep within a zone that they claimed was a safe zone, and this is the one spot that they hit within that zone. So you can't know for sure that's the motive, but it doesn't look great.
No, it doesn't look great.
22 journalists have already died in the course of this.
Yes.
Israel has a long history of targeting journalists.
They killed a Palestinian-American journalist, Shireen Abu Akleh, and our government didn't do shit about it. Right. Nothing. Not a fucking thing. Not a fucking thing. And if they were able to target this guy's family, that would speak very well of their intelligence capabilities, which apparently failed on October 7th and has been pretty reliable since then. Yeah, exactly. Since then. In a statement, Al Jazeera's parent company, the Al Jazeera Media Network, blamed an Israeli airstrike and condemned the killings as an indiscriminate assault. See, it blamed Mr. al-Dadu's family had taken refuge at the camp after Israel called for civilians to move south. Al Jazeera is deeply concerned about the safety and well-being of our colleagues in Gaza and hold the Israeli authorities responsible for their security, the network said. A spokesperson for the Israeli military said in an email that it had targeted Hamas terrorist infrastructure in the area, adding that its forces take feasible precautions to mitigate civilian casualties. And again, with guys like Biden coming up and saying, well, we don't even believe these death counts are accurate, who is there to hold them accountable for making statements like that? Statements that they obviously don't mean, they have obviously no intention of living up to. Who is going to blow the whistle on them? Nobody.
Right.
Nobody. Right? It's just a blank check. Mr. al-Dadu had spent Wednesday reporting from Gaza City and learned of his family's deaths live on air, an Al Jazeera editor, Mohammed Mowad, said in posts on social media. Al Jazeera identified 2 of the deceased as Mr. al-Dadu's teenage son, Mahmoud, and his young daughter, Sham. So we're going to go to a couple videos here. We are not going to show videos of him with any dead children or bodies that we think. First of all, we would get the video age blocked, which we don't want because we want as many people to see these as possible. Second, I just think it's in poor taste to do that. But here he is walking through the hospital after getting the news.
جوالك يا حسن بينفعش هذا الله ونعم الوكيل.
Now, told you it's not easy to do this. Here's a statement he put out on video because he's back at work. He's back at work.
Right back.
He went right back. And here he is.
How do you do that?
Here he is, talking about why.
السلام عليكم. أولا شكرا على كل رسائل التضامن والاتصالات والسؤال عنا والتضامن معنا والدعوات لنا. بالتأكيد هذا شيء كان مهما بالنسبة لنا، لكن رأينا أنه من الواجب أن نعود سريعا رغم كل شيء. فالساحة والمحاور ما زالت تشتعل كما ترون بالغارات وبالقصف المدفعي والتطورات متلاحقة. فرأيت أن من واجبي رغم الوجع ورغم الجرح النازف أن أعود سريعا وألتقيكم من خلال عدسة الكاميرا عبر مواقع التواصل. يعطيكم العافية وأسألكم الدعاء دائما وأبدا. السلام عليكم.
You know, I can only think that, and this is only speculation, obviously, you know, I could never know what it's like to be in that position. But I can only think that part of the reason why, you know, he handles that with such poise and why so many of these people handle it with such poise, you know, we saw the interview with Bassem Youssef, talking about, you know, his family's, the house being bombed out and, you know, not knowing whether they're okay. This is just, and this speaks to this problem of this is just reality for these people.
Yes.
Like, it's reality. Like, the risk of being blown up in an airstrike is something they're used to.
Right.
And so when it happens, obviously it's tragic. Obviously it's, you know, I could never claim to know what that feeling is like. But it's not a surprise. Like, it's not necessarily a shock. They know this is a risk they take every single day just by being alive, just for the fault of having been born into a concentration camp. And this is what low-life whores, yes, like Richie Torres, will never tell you. Will never tell you that, no, the conflict did not start on October 7th. This has been a fact of life for people in Gaza going back decades. And so maybe that has something to do with why he was able to get back to work so quickly. Because at a certain level, and again, I'm only speculating. I want to qualify this. I do not claim to speak for any of these people. But if I'm speculating, the only explanation I can come up with that makes sense for me, and again, this is biased because this is a subjective thing on my part, but it can only be because they know that this is a risk they take every day. And so it's not out of nowhere when it happens.
I think it's also their religious faith. I think that's probably part of what keeps them going and supports them. If you look at the language he used, it was very rooted in Islamic philosophy and thought. But yeah, you're right. I mean, look at us, and of course there's no comparison here, but it just shows you how quickly people can become acclimated to horrors. It's our nature as a species. We're adaptable. Look at this shooting. That happened in May. Like, that one's bad enough that it pricked people's ears up a little bit, but it's not a huge story. It's not.
No.
Not the way it would have been 20 years ago. Like, that would have been the only story.
Of course.
And news. That would have been round-the-clock coverage about that.
Even 10 years ago, that would have been the only story.
Sure. We've become desensitized to these shootings. Obviously, on a much larger scale, that's what's happened to people in this region. You know, I mean, you go back, this is part of our reaction to COVID and the culture of safetyism. In the West, we've become so safe that to even contemplate death and mortality is like a faux pas. And you look at the world that people lived in really until about 100 years ago, and death was a constant companion, right? People didn't live very long. You go through an old cemetery, everybody's dead by their 40s, right? I mean, 40s is already a ripe old age. And we in the West are so removed and insulated from that. And I think part of what this is bringing home to people who do live in this relatively safe society is how horrific the conditions are in the rest of the world. And that's why this is such a PR disaster for Israel. Nobody was really looking into this, right? Not even us, to our shame, right? Not even people within our movement, to our shame. We weren't talking about this. We weren't covering this. And now we're aware. I know things about this I did not know a week ago.
Right, of course.
And that's true of tens of millions of people. And you just cannot look at something like this and say, I stand with Israel. How can you? How can you? I mean, at best, you're calling for a ceasefire.
Right. Of course. Of course. But if you're Richie Torres and they gave you $141,000, then I guess you can look the other way.
Then I guess you can.
Right?
Guess you can.
If you're on the board at Raytheon and you see this as a revenue potential, I guess you can look the other way or just force it out of your mind. 100 senators just voted unanimously to condemn anti-Semitism on college campuses, equating anti-Israel protests with anti-Semitism, which we talked about earlier in the show, obviously. Right. We have to say it again because we're going to clip this separately. But, anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism are not the same thing. It is a very offensive comparison to say they are. And everybody voted for it, including Bernie Sanders voted for that. And so you look at a situation like this and you just look at how no one in power is willing to say what is just so obviously the basic moral truth. I mean, it's not difficult. It's not hard. Nobody will say it. Nobody will say it.
Well, the people are saying it. And that's what's fascinating. And as we talked about on the Patreon stream last night, I think the reason you're getting more fair press coverage, like that Washington Post article, for example, hitting back at Biden's claim that the numbers are unreliable. Who's in these newsrooms now? We decry it when it's a Taylor Lorenz trying to cancel people for bullshit, but at the same time, these people are going to be much more sympathetic to the Palestinian cause. These are the reporters now. The reporters are that generation, the old guard, the RFK kind of people who came up with Israel is always right. That's not the bulk of the newsroom anymore. And I think that's why you're getting fairer press coverage than I've ever seen in my lifetime.